Hi everyone. I'm very jealous of everyone's tea and coffees. Um, My name is Patrick. I'm the Chief Executive of Heart of Glass, and this is the session called Boys in the Making. We have got a brilliant lineup of guests here for you. Full disclosure, I did tell them it was going to be a small, intimate affair with 20 to 30 people, and now we're in this cavernous room. But we're going to try and make it as interactive as possible. We've got a lot of information to share about the project, but then we really do want to hear from people. So please do think about some questions or observations or thoughts you might want to share. So we're joined today by Dr. Fiona Whelan and Dannielle McKenna. Fiona is an artist. Dannielle McKenna works at Rialto Youth Project. And we're also joined by Michael Byrne, who's also from Rialto Youth Project, and Aaron Sunderland-Carey, who's also an artist, and my colleague Kate here from Heart of Glass, who leads on our children and young people's programmes. I think someone mentioned earlier on there's full biogs in the conference pack if you want to have a read up about people. But the title of the session is Boys in the Making. Heart of Glass, we've been making work with children and young people since we began in 2014. This project that's on the screen now is a project that we did during COVID with the artist Rudy Lowe, working with a group of queer young people, and it was a project that culminated in the installation of a public art network project across St Helens, but also in London during COVID. And last week we launched a publication called The Book of Knowsley, which was made by 250 young people with a pair of artists. That was a guidebook for adults made by children and young people. But the first kind of foray of projects that we developed with children and young people started back in 2015, 2016. This is one image from that project, but essentially a group of young people one morning in St Helens arrived in paper boiler suits and flower crowns and gave out flowers to people around the town and invited them to march on the town hall where they were going to declare a new children's charter for the borough, which was received by the council and then since adopted. So that kind of idea of centering young people's voice and experience and kind of, I suppose, puncturing that or interfacing that with the kind of systems that dictate their lives and experiences feels really important to us. But the subject of masculinity and the theme of this project really came from, I suppose, an unexpected, but maybe not unexpected source. We were developing a program of work with young girls and women that led us to create a space to discuss, I suppose led us to think about the need to create a space for a conversation about masculinity with boys and men. And that program with the girls and young women brought into stark focus the lived experience of patriarchy and the anxiety around how boys and men were shaped by the world. We obviously now live in a post-adolescence world. It's a conversation that is a huge hot topic, but we've been collaborating with the team here for a number of years now, and their work extends, which you'll hear shortly, far back over, I think, the 20 years potentially, if not longer. So we've been working together for a couple of years, and the title of the work, which you'll hear more about shortly, is Boys in the Making. It's a long-term collaborative arts project led by artist Fiona Whelan and the youth community development worker Dannielle McKenna, which explores how men and boys are shaped by and influence the world they live in, and it aims to create a significant public dialogue around the current state of masculinity. So the project operates at the intersection of collaborative art practice, performance and youth work. And within the project, which you'll hear about shortly, there's a number of different strands, including long-term and short-term forms of engagement, as well as public artworks, and that all contributes to a continuous development of conversation, learning and expansion of the overall project and its themes. So we're delighted and privileged to be working with this team for a couple of years now. We're at the kind of start of a journey. So we're going to give you a bit of a backstory to the Boys in the Making work, and then we'll open it out to the floor. Fiona and Dannielle, over to you.
Thanks, Patrick. Am I on? Yes. Does that sound? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's lovely to be here. Thanks. We were on an early flight out of Dublin, so nice to be here. Yeah, let's begin. He is a boy. He is from here, and you are responsible for him. This is the first prompt in the first session that a group will encounter in the Boys in the Making programme. The core methodological device that is central to the programme is the co-creation of a boy by a group of boys or young men who take responsibility for naming their boy and guiding him through life. So, as Patrick said, Boys in the Making was developed by myself, an artist, and Rialto Youth Project through practice, trial and error, testing ideas, learning together, learning in public. And the methodology builds on this 20-year collaboration between myself and the Youth Project, which has been committed to exploring issues of power and inequality, through long-term creative processes that really position multiple, diverse and varied lived experiences centrally, and commit to exploring, visualising and disrupting power relations while also reimagining alternative futures. So Boys in the Making forms part also of a wider project called What Does He Need that was developed by myself, Rialto Youth Project and Broken Talkers, who are Phelim Cannon and Gary Keegan, a theatre company, in 2018. And the project has been committed to focusing on how boys and men are shaped by the world they live in and how they influence the world they live in. Through public art, performance, workshops and programmes, this project aims to create a significant public dialogue about the current state of masculinity. So we've many methods of engagement, short-term and long-term, with communities and publics. And the one we're talking about today is Boys in the Making, a programme that's deeply rooted in a history of collaborative arts and youth work in Rialto and in the longitudinal and iterative What Does He Need project. So maybe just to begin, I'd like to position 3 key features of the methodology. The first is that it positions children and young people as the experts. The invitation to create a character, a boy from the same place as the group, creates a space where a group can draw on their own lived experiences, on their own observations, and bring that to bear on the life of the character they've created. Secondly, the process takes place in a group setting, experienced collectively. So it's not about an individual making a boy, it's more akin to a collective research action where knowledge is created through the collective relational process. And central to this process is the dialogue that happens between a group who collectively take responsibility for the boy they've made. The process can be full of disagreements and tensions that reveal very important insights as details of the boy's life are negotiated. The space can also be seen as one of care, as a group of boys are invited to care for another boy, considering his needs and making decisions together in his best interest as they perceive it to be. A third feature to note is how the process bridges reality and fiction. The fictional nature of the character is important here because it creates anonymity. The boy is nobody, but he is part of everybody, and he can embody a number of contrasting experiences and views born from the conversation that created him. A group will map real observations onto the boy's life. They'll give him real advice based on what they know. They'll unpack what forces are going to be present that influence his life and inform him of what choices they perceive he may have. They can also create a life for the boy to include things they may perceive not to be possible for them, or maybe give him things they don't have. So he's a fictional character, but he exists in a real place, in a real world. He's imagined, but not in the sense of the kind of childhood imagination. Here we're talking about real imagination about the world, how it is and how it could be. So the 3 features combined see this kind of staging of a fictional life born into a real place, a real world through a group process, and creates the potential for conversations to move between the socially scripted reality that the group perceive for the boy and the potential to be found in imagining a new space and a new world and new realities. So maybe just to take you back for a moment to 2019 in Dublin, in Rialto, where the process began with one group, aged 16 to 17, 2 youth workers, Michael being one of them, and myself as artist. And we meet weekly in a space with a group of young men developing a boy that they called Stevie. Through careful facilitation, drawing, writing, conversation, food, tea, playing pool. Themes are not prescribed in Boys in the Making. Whatever is brought into the room serves as a prompt for inquiry, redirected always towards the boy character, towards Stevie, his life, interests, loves, fears, concerns, and ambitions. Of central importance for all leading the process was holding this space as private and supportive, where boys and young men could speak frankly, where judgment could be suspended, to fully explore how it is that this character interacts with the world, how it shapes him and how he shapes it. In this space, young men argue for certain futures for the boy that they've now named, dressed and sculpted a life for, as they send him out into the world, considering what he needs to do, and where he will find his agency to act in the world, how he will find respect, and in the words of the Stevie group, how he can be somebody. The emerging story becomes an invitation to see inside young men's experiences. With all our different roles established as the artist in the space, my process was focused on capturing and working with the insights of young people. At each session, armed with a pen and pile of paper, I would write down the young men's conversations and then often read them aloud at the end of the group, at the end of the session. and then go away, type them, collate them, make drawings and compilations of texts and ideas, and bring them back the week after. This was a commitment to listening, but I wasn't just listening, I was demonstrating that I was listening. Recognizing, though, the intersubjective nature of listening, an important part of sharing back was always to inquire, was this what you actually said? Have we heard correctly? Have we misrepresented anything? This process of listening and sharing back first seemed unusual, but actually normalised very quickly for the young people and has become a key feature of the Boys in the Making sessions. This isn't an extractive process. The first destination of this, what you might call research material, is the group themselves. And each week, their words and images fold back in and inform the next conversation, leading to a deeper inquiry, a bigger story, as the effects of being listened to are felt and young people further engage with the material and edit and develop and create more. Through the artisan youth worker holding the space for listening, young people were hearing back a little bit of themselves in this composite character and listening to each other. And really importantly, this programme isn't a one-directional educational process. The listening can't stop here. There is another phase of work to consider: who else needs to listen to this story? A key question that marks the transition from the enclosed conversations of what we've now described as phase 1 to begin phase 2, the public address. And it's in phase 2 where other publics are imagined and the possibility of moving outside the enclosed private space is explored, as groups consider the possibility of a communicative action of speaking truth to power or speaking truth to their world via the creation of an artwork that will delve into some aspect of the story that's to be told and that young people will find a way to tell publicly. Much like the themes not being prescribed, in Boys in the Making, the art form is also emergent. This is not a production model. The ideas are born of the process, the ideas, the skills, the interest in the room and the organisation and the artists. What is the story to be told? What form of artwork do we need to make to tell it? What public is this intended for? And how will we create the conditions for listening?
Thanks, Fiona. And as we talked about Stevie being the first boy that was created, we knew in Rialto Youth Project that we wanted to continue and see how this could be repeatable. And in Rialto Youth Project, we are based in Dublin, just outside the city, and we work across a working class community with young people from age 5 right up to 25 who have been impacted by that structural inequality, and then how that impact then shows on them is through many different ways. But I suppose what we began to do was identify what were the groups that we were going to begin to look at, and who were the workers that were going to be part of that process. And over time we got to witness the creation of Joey and Deco, Connor George, there was Gareth Fred, CJ, Cruz, Dimitri and Big Boy Vincent. And each of those boys had their own space and place on the map, and their portrait is on our website as well. And again, as Fiona mentioned, the first group who made Stevie, they created an animation and a poem. But since then, we've seen posters, we've seen films, we've seen a song, a book, a mural, drawings. So there's many ways in which the artwork can come to life. And in that, I suppose, when Stevie's story was first made, what the group spoke about in the beginning of it was the idea of capturing a moment, that we were already wondering, what are the decisions that are being made for him? And their words were, would this be a solution or a downfall in the story that they created for Stevie? So this question is really important, and the question of this moment in time from the young men is very important, because like all of us, life is not fixed. There's never a single story. Things can be complex and there's always movement. The process doesn't want to claim a communication that is universal for all experiences, but that it is a story of this boy at that time. And again, because of the Rialto Youth Project being positioned in the heart of the community over generations, it also means that young men and boys can come back to their story and recreate it again, or change it, or see after time where might that boy be now. So I think, as well as Fiona mentioned, that idea of the conversations in phase 1 and the importance of that privacy space where young men can really begin to think through the themes and the things that are needed for that boy at the time. And not all of them conversations will go into into the public. And that's a very important kind of careful piece that is done with young people, the youth worker and the artist together to make sure that young people are very much in control of the narrative that's going out into public, and that it is that kind of, when you are speaking your truth into public, that it can actually come with a very strong risk, and the risk of being judged. So there's a lot of care needed, and that's something for the youth workers, young people and artists to consider. What is at stake during this brave time of moving something into a public space? So, and again, like that, thinking about how it goes into public. So phase 2 is often done very gradually. So moving from the private to the public can be done in small pieces, or groups may decide that they're ready for something bigger, or they wanted to go to an exhibition or a website. So there's a lot of that consideration to be done. And I think when we first had done Stevie and we understood the need for that repeatability and the development of the methodology, we were very fortunate to work very closely with Dr. Kieran Smith. And from 2021, we really began to capture that process and think about that kind of, what is it that we want to do that is repeatable. And Kieran proposed the title then of Boys in the Making, which was great. And he really helped us to understand that kind of this construction of a boy and a young man in a space is, as well as mediating the social, the cultural, the political and the economic processes that govern that construction of masculinity. So as we began to write up that methodology, we then understood that there was actually a pre-phase before you go into the first one, and that was around the organisational buy-in. And for us as Rialto Youth Project, are we really committed to being part of this longer term process and understand what does it take for this collaboration to work? So it is that kind of idea of building the relationships of collaboration from the beginning, the process of identifying the specific roles that are needed for this to happen, who on the youth work team is bringing skills and what might be something that they can bring to the process, who are the artists that need to be engaged, and then what are we doing to support groups to be ready for this. So that's all very important in developing that kind of pedagogy of practice and the repeatability of it without it being too prescribed, because we really want to make sure that there's room for groups to make it their own as well. And all the time recognising the critical question of that idea of why. So from the minute that the group come into the room and they are asked, what is this boy's name? And why would you use this name? Why is this name important for that boy? So that continuing of the idea of why. Why do you want this for him? You know, and then it very important, as mentioned there, around that bringing it back to the story of the boy and using the story of the boy to explore the different themes that are emerging and not making it personal to the boys in the room. And to date, we've had so many different things coming up and in the room. We've talked about relationships, about dominance, we've talked about violence, gender identity, the search for dignity and respect, social conditioning, bullying, sexuality, poverty and survival, and that's only a few. And then I suppose after we had done some processes in Rialto, again in 2021, we really wanted to think about how we would continue the work but also maybe expand it. So we went into this idea of groups coming together who were across Dublin. So they were from different disciplines and backgrounds, some community organisations, some schools, and then what could we learn and how would this be created across Dublin. And again, we've met now, we have Kante and we have Frank, there's now JP and Reese, there's Tom, Jeff, Ashton, James and Louis. And we've learned a lot from all these different contexts. And we've had many requests in recent years around that repeatability of the project. But I suppose the invitation from Heart of Glass was particularly interesting for us, because not only did it involve us working very closely together from the beginning and understanding the deep values that we were all bringing together as organisations and doing that work together from the ground before even entering that phase 1. We got to really begin to look at that, but also that idea of another place, you know, so here in the UK, then what would happen here and how might that emerge? And then also the commitment together from ourselves and Heart of Glass to really look at then what else is needed for this expansion of the project. And it was really great meeting some of the team yesterday who are starting it here. So, that phase 1 is about to start, so that was very exciting. And then I suppose, again, from the beginning, that idea of the fictional and the real and the boys getting to meet each other, we always thought about that when we began to see all the different boys coming to life. We thought, is there ever going to be a time they'll get to see each other? And just there in January and February, we were delighted to be able to hold an exhibition and a month-long programme in NCAD in Dublin, in the gallery, and this got to happen. And along with the different artworks that were created by the groups across Dublin, there was also a larger scale life figure of each of the boys, and they were standing next to another one of the boys, and just seeing that group of boys looking out into the gallery and looking out in the world and inviting us to see them and really begin to listen to them. And I suppose that programme of events as well was very carefully developed for the exhibition. We created a dialogue space designed right in the centre of the gallery, and that was able to host lots of different workshops, philosophical dialogues. We had performance and events, and it was all about responding to the different themes that the young people spoke about while they were doing the Boys in the Making programme. And these themes often related to the idea of the performance of masculinity, the idea of protection and care, role models, and then the intersections of masculinity as it related to race, gender, class, and sexuality. And this is something that we were recognising as the phase 3 part of the methodology, where the insights of boys and young men could then contribute to that wider public dialogue of how it is that boys and young men are shaped by and influence the world that they live in.
Is this on? Brilliant. So I came aboard the project a couple of years ago, and although I always had an interest in working with people and developing work together, I came from a background in fine art that meant that the artist's voice held all of the power. So the piece that was produced at the end was kind of produced through the lens of the artist. So coming onto a project like this began a process of unlearning for me, to begin to release control of the work and embrace something that was more messy and beautiful in its own way. As an artist working with a group of young men and youth workers, that came as a challenge initially, to begin to unpack a new process of working and to try and grasp participation within art and collaboration within art, and how to understand when to use them and when to move between them. As an artist, I think naturally you try to control the space in order to get the desired aesthetic outcome. However, the group you're working with might disagree with your approach and your ideas, and so you need to embrace this and go back to the drawing board, which happens a lot within this process. So, the important part of this work, in my opinion, is what is said within the space. What the young people say and what they decide the world needs to hear. This became clear to me once I was in the space, running workshops, and even just chatting to or listening to these young men. I heard insightful and amazing things about being a boy and growing into a man. It became clear to me that I needed to use my skills as an artist to help these young men express these ideas to a wider public. The release of control over the output became a lot easier from then on. Being open and fluid in your thinking is the key tool here as an artist. I can't understate the value of working with non-artists. Through this process, I've worked with many different people, young men, educators, scholars, philosophers, but most importantly, youth workers. The values and the teachings from the youth workers are what sustain this work. The relationships they have with the young men keep this whole thing together. Boys in the Making comes out of the wider What Does He Need project. So with this, you're trying to hold a needs-based approach within creating the work and building the story. Starting as an artist, painting paintings and making video work, care and needs are not always something in the forefront of your mind, but when making the switch to socially engaged and collaborative practice, you find yourself learning again and again about the value of this. The creation of a boy gives these young men a space and someone to care, and for someone to try and equip with what he needs. Simultaneously, you have to bring into your awareness that these young men are still young men, so you have to bring some of that same thinking in with yourself around care and needs. What do these young men need? What do they need to stay engaged, to be comfortable within the space, to complete the work, to feel confident enough to say what they want to say? How do we care for them? How do we manage and maintain what is produced and goes out into the public? How do we create something that says what these young men want to say without harming them or putting them at risk? And that's not always easy as an artist. Something could be said in a space that you think could become a brilliant piece of artwork that you jump at, but it might be too exposing for the young men, and so it can go back again to the drawing board. This is where the collaboration between the artist and the youth worker is vital, as they'll spot things that you missed, but they'll also pick up on things that you missed. The work I've done with this project has undoubtedly become some of the work I'm most proud of. When you're gathering all of these amazing insights from young men over a period of time, and then that shapes into a story, a life, a boy, and from there that boy is made real through an artwork you've all collaborated on together. I believe that all that hard work is felt through the piece that goes public. The artwork becomes layered, it becomes more valuable because it's not the thoughts and experiences and views of one artist, but instead an entire group. The boy who's been created becomes complex and speaks to something very real. For example, Deco, a young man, now aged 14, confused and tired, told too many times, too many different ways of being a man. Deco, when we first met him, was 12 years of age. He's seen many different issues around his community and faced many challenges in his own life, but he was more concerned with playing football and going to the park with his friends. Now revisiting Deco at 14, he feels lost. He wants to be a good man, but he's not sure how. He wants to do the right thing, but everyone tells him different ways of how to do the right thing. He doesn't want to fight. He doesn't like fighting, but he feels he needs to know how to so that he can protect his family. When he was younger, caring for his little sister meant spending time with her, spending his pocket money on getting jellies for both of them, and playing computer games with her. Now caring for his sister has become needing to defend her and feeling like he needs to protect her by fighting. Deco wears a Canada Goose jacket. He always took pride in his clothes. When he was younger, he felt cool for wearing Nike and brands. Now as he gets older, he feels he needs to keep wearing them to fit in. He's aware people might make assumptions of him based on how he dresses. He knows people might assume he sells drugs based on that Canada Goose jacket, but he doesn't care. That image, that branding, he feels works to protect him. He knows his clothes can help him blend in, to have status, to protect him. They've gone from something exciting as a child to a tool or a uniform now. Deco is a prime example of the collaborative process at work. Through long-term engagement and relationship building, Deco has moved through the different phases of the project twice now. He's had a film, a series of posters, illustrations, audio pieces, murals, an exhibition. However, every day wasn't producing work, and I'm a huge supporter of the idea that the artist needs to be given time to build that trust and relationship with the group, to kick the ball around with the lads, to sit and eat, to chat, to play pool. These little things play a huge role in getting to know the young men and ultimately have a direct impact on the output of the work. Compare this to Vincent. Vincent is 9, he's scared. He's aware of the influence that the older men in his life have. In a hyper-masculine world with a dad and many older brothers, he misses his ma. He's trying to learn his place in the social order. He realises other boys have more power. He realises that when other boys speak, people listen. And then when some boys speak, no one listens. Vincent wants to be the boy that everyone listens to. This group is much more cautious, and we've been in phase 1 for a much longer period of time. This project needs patience and time and commitment from everyone who's involved. They've pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and we're now doing work that is not my forte at all. But that's what the boys need, and that's what the boys want, so that's where we're going with it. The key takeaway I would have is the value of the voice of the group, work on developing the relationships between artists, youth workers, and the young men. Embrace the messiness and have patience and trust the process.
So, yeah, moving on, I'm on. So moving on with the youth work process, I suppose one of the things is with all the creativity and the art, youth work has to play a role in terms of creating spaces for young people. So how do we get young people involved in spaces? So one of the things that we did as youth workers was observations. So we would go out into the communities, we would target specific groups of young people. In relation to this, I suppose it was young men. And one of the key things, myself and the youth workers for Thomas, who would have worked with me in terms of the Stevie piece, we went into the community, we had an observation where we had a specific target group of young men who we thought we needed to buy back into the project. And one of the things that happened was we went into the community, sat down in spaces where they were, where there was a difference between ourselves, where they were rejecting the idea about coming into youth work, but we were also trying a way in which to reconnect them back into a youth service because we felt that that was what they needed at the time. So continued outreach was a way of connecting the dots and letting young people know that the youth service was there. And through the outreach and the balance of conversation between both, we then became aware that there was a space available. So when that space became available, the what does he need space was growing, the legs were growing, and then I suppose we, as Rialto Youth Project and artist Fiona, came together and had a conversation about, let's do a trial here with this group of young men and see what they'd be buying into the process and how will we get them involved. So we found that process, we brought them in, pool, darts, chats, and just a bit of crack in a room in Rialto. And basically we sat down, had a conversation, and then just be curious about different things. We threw out different questions we kind of asked through just the basic level of a youth work practice. Some of the groups also, apart from that kind of harder to reach group, are ready made. So there is a group of friends who would be coming together. And again, it was that kind of opportunity about coming to them and saying, look, we have a process called the Boys in the Making process. Would you be interested in exploring masculinity and what that looks like for you, or what it looks like for you as young men, but also in the wider society? And the buy-in comes naturally with that, because again, the youth work process has worked and the relationships have been established. And then another thing that comes with that is the group dynamics. How do we manage them in terms of how, well, I suppose youth workers take lead in terms of the group dynamics and how it shapes itself. So again, how do we get all young people to take part and gradually participate together in a room socially to talk about masculinity? You know, because all young people, some high risk, some medium risk, some low risk, and then just the confidence to speak out as a group of young men to talk about something so specific. And I think what worked well with that was the non-judgmental approach. So again, sometimes that's a challenge for youth work, because generally when certain things pop up, like racism, like homophobia, all these different things that pop up, youth workers are straight in to tackle, right, and challenge the young people in a way to say, look, we need it. Whereas this was an opportunity to be more curious about where they're coming from, why they're using the language, what is it about the language that they're using, why do they feel the need, where did they hear the language from? And for us, it was a way, and I think the Boys in the Making process allowed young people to be more open-minded to connect with the youth work process, but also to buy back into a youth service was a natural development with that. And then also it was an opportunity for young people to share their voice. You know, using the boy as a way of creating an opportunity for young men to talk out loud, not naturally about themselves, but using the boy as a way to distinctly talk about themselves. And sometimes the relationship with youth work, and also the formation of a relationship with the artist within the space. Trust had to be built. So when you were in that space, the trust had to be built with the artist, because the youth workers had somewhat of a relationship, but gradually the young people invested their time to connect that relationship with youth workers and artists. So again, that brought in more about the process. So how do we engage the process? So again, the curiosity, the nature of how much can we invest ourselves to ask these curious questions with the young people wanting to buy in, and naturally get, as I say, as Fiona said earlier, it was Fiona sitting there with the pen and the paper and taking notes down, but all three of us working in unison, asking the questions in different times when we felt the opportunity was there, because we didn't want to go too far too quickly, because we felt we would push the young people away too quickly, but they gradually took part and they engaged in a conversation. Notes were taken, and after every note that was taken, there was a reflection shared back to the young people at the end of every week further on. So during the process, there's moments where we have to take a moment where a certain thing would pop up, right? So I think in the moment of Stevie, right, there was a moment where myself, Thomas, and Fiona came back together and obviously after reading the poem at that time, and I had noticed that there was a pattern of behaviour that was going on within the sharing of the story, and that there was language used that would describe and say a young man within the community. And I obviously shared this with Fiona and Thomas in a way to say, look, we need to be careful, because it's describing, I would feel it was describing a young man, and that we need to go back to the young men to be more curious about where they're going and what the lens they're trying to put on that, and that we did have to take certain words out, because we didn't want it to be too close to the young person, that would become more a target to a young person within the community than a natural just engagement of the young men, creating a buoy related to them as the group that was going on. And also, but also one of the things that allows for the young people, as I say, is sharing their voice and the opportunity to speak out loud through an interactive space with artists and youth workers on an equal playing field, that we're not here to judge, we're not here to criticise, we're here just to talk about the essence of masculinity, the essence of what it means to be a young man living in the community of Rialto, the essence of being a young man growing up in a disadvantaged community, and how would you, if you were to tell the boy, what would he look like to come to engage in a community like this? How would you see it? So what kind of reflections would you make on that? And I think that was the beauty of the collaboration between ourselves and the artists. So again, we took time out before and after sessions to talk, about one of the things is, are the young people going to come, right? Every session we had, there was a question mark about, are young people going to come in? Are they going to continue the process? But again, it's that open communication between ourselves and the artist about keeping contact the same, so that we were able to say, look, the young people aren't going to come in today. You know what I mean? But again, it was still allowed us to have that kind of conversation about what can we do differently to make the space more invitational to the young people, and how we brought them to engage. But I think the natural progression of the poem and the essence of the story that they were trying to tell kept them engaged. We did lose some. We can't deny that some young people do fall off. But we did keep a cohort of them that were really invested in terms of wanting to explore and create the boy further and further. But as Aaron said, one of the things that does help is that personal versus professional reflection of yourself. As a youth worker, one of the things we do demonstrate is that personal identity about, if you're asking young people to be vulnerable, how can you as a worker then be vulnerable with them as well? And bringing that kind of thing into this, that opportunity, reflection into the space, because I know for me, being a part of the Stevie piece, there was moments where I used that personal reflection to capture some of the stuff that was coming out for the young men, and trying to bring it back, saying, look, I hear what you're saying, but I also understand that it's a way for you to share. But I think if you take heed what you're saying, I think it will lend a lot more to understanding who you truly are as yourself. Phone keeps going off. That's chaos. Another question that comes up for youth work is, are young people ready? And what does this mean? Are we all ready in the sense? But I think the beauty of this is that trial and error period of saying, well, let's invest in this, let's bring it to the young people, let's explore this, and I suppose young people will let you know themselves about what it means to be engaged in the process. Are they wanting to engage? They'll tell you if it's good for them, they'll tell you if it's not good for them, they'll tell you we'll go along with it, we'll keep going. And I think the beauty of that is the relationship it builds with the youth workers. And I think the essence of the artist building that natural relationship with young people, and the young people returning the way back to the artist to saying, okay, we hear you as well, so we're going to work together collaboratively. I can't even say that word, collaboratively. You know what I mean? Together. And then I suppose that brings the triangular method of what has been the beauty of collaboration within Rialto Youth Project over the years between, at moments, there was artists, youth workers, sociologists, there was artists, youth workers, young people, many, many times, right? And me being there 20 years ago, I've been a part of that kind of triangular process for many, many years. And I think the beauty of the Boys in the Making has allowed that for the young people and artists and youth workers to come together to share that equal level. So there's equal opportunity. So again, the decision-making processes that comes back between, so again, artists, youth workers planning the spaces, but also going and checking in with the young people to see if it's something they would like to do. And that beauty of keeping the richness of honesty and openness to it, young people as well as us as the workers in the space. And I think that's one of the richnesses that happens, is that young people feel heard, feel their voices are being listened to. And I think the beauty of collaboration allows for that process to gradually make its way to create such powerful pieces, especially for young people, especially for young men, even to be at the moments of where they are vulnerable. the boys get an opportunity to allow young men to be vulnerable in their own way without it having to be distinguished towards them as individuals. But again, their stories are shared within the bodies that they create within them, within Stevie, Deco, Frankie, Connor George, Connor Fred, all of these. But again, the ages, right? I suppose one of the things that youth work lends is the 10 to 24 age bracket, right? So how do we get to that stage? Like even the beauty of younger people, young boys coming in talking about different things. But again, the nature of what it talks about, bullying, you know what I mean, antisocial behaviour, drug dealing, all these different things. You're like, okay, this is how young men are. You know, and how do we create opportunity? I think the Boys in the Making creates opportunity for dialogue and difference.
We'll throw open to the floor if anyone's got any kind of questions. I suppose just to say that the stage we're at now in terms of kind of working together is a lot of that kind of foundational work. And I think one of the things that's been interesting for us is that, you know, the work that Rialto Youth Project does is pretty unique and pretty special. Frankly, it's amazing. And I think, you know, we haven't got that youth community development infrastructure. I think, you know, the community development sector has been hammered and attacked and systematically dismantled now for such a long time. So a lot of that foundational work is about thinking, well, who are the people that work and support and work with young people, and starting to build those relationships. So a lot of that foundational work has been really essential. If there's any questions from the floor, just pop your hand up and I'll keep an eye out for you. While we're waiting for hands to pop up, one of the things that I suppose was there a question there? Yeah, go ahead.
Direct as what you're doing. Oh, sorry. I was just wondering about the engagement process, because we're finding it more and more difficult as particularly young lads sort of disappear into their bedrooms, and particularly after education, when they finish their they've got to be educated until 18, and then it's really hard to get hold of them at that point because they're living at home. They're not claiming any benefits. How do you talked about going into the parks and sitting around. That doesn't seem to work so much anymore. What are you doing?
Well, that's one part of the outreach process. But one other part of the outreach is targeted ones, right? So we would knock on doors. You know what I mean? We would check in the young people at home, you know what I mean, and kind of get an idea of where they're at based on that. So again, it depends on the movement of where they are. So a lot of the time is we would go knocking on doors and checking in with the young people, inviting them into spaces consecutively. So again, although they'll tell us no on the first instance, we repeat it every time just to say, look, we know it's a shortfall, but again, you're 5 minutes away, we're over here, come and have the quick look at, just even check it out, you know. And I think, but there is challenges with that. As I say, even with the Stevie piece, we did find the fall off, right? Some young people didn't want to buy into it, but there is young people who are. And I think the challenge for the thing is I suppose, is the gaming aspect of things. So we have reached that challenge where young people are starting to stay indoors because, one, it's safer, right? One of the things that comes with that, it's safe for young people to stay indoors because of the amount of difficulty that's going on within the community itself. But also as well, it's that kind of sheltered way of protecting themselves, of staying indoors. And sometimes parents feel okay with that. But for us, it's that want to keep them going and saying, look, if you don't feel comfortable walking across, even, like as I say, we're probably from here to the door, a stone throw away from some of the young people we work with, but we'll walk with you, right? And we'll bring you back. We'll keep it going, you know what I mean, until we get that initial buy-in to say, we will keep you safe. You know, it's not hard. It won't be hard. It won't be difficult. We'll keep it at your pace. And again, sometimes they'll buy in, but again, we don't give up, right? We don't give up, and we just continuously go and continuously check in and say, look, it's trial and error.
And I think as well on that one, the idea of community leadership. So for us, and like what Patrick's saying about that decimation of community and youth work here, and we've been watching it from Dublin for years, but for us, the idea of we're very lucky. Rialto Youth Project is 40 years old, and the most of the people who work there are from the community. So you know, they might have even been young people in the community. So generationally, we've worked with families for over 20, 30, 40 years. So it is about that of who is holding the relationship? Everything is relationship based. Who is got those deep, meaningful relationships with young people, and how are they being made? And how do young people feel like their needs are being met? Because if you're talking about meeting needs, then young people will come. If they're feeling that sense of being valued, of belonging, of respect, of community, of all of them different things, of love, of care, then they will come. So it is that kind of thing of what does that engagement look like and how is it happening as well.
There's a question just there in the middle.
I was just going to ask about the sort of, obviously you're going to end up having quite complicated and difficult conversations with a lot of the young people that you're working with, and for an arts project that could become quite complicated, I guess, in terms of like some of the issues that come up around maybe things where you're worried about safeguarding or people that are sort of getting into quite deep, heavy conversations. I just wondered how you dealt with those ones, because you're providing the forum for those to all come out. Like, what do you do when you're aware that then people are vulnerable to particular issues or problems within that community? What's your kind of next step or referral process for them, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of that happening, and I think it also depends on the context. So like that, some of our community partners have been schools, so it's a very different process for schools as well. So it does depend on where it is, but there have been times where for us that an issue has come up, say, for example, around pornography or the sharing of pornographic images. That has happened before, and it was about, okay, what we need to just slow down for a minute and begin to think about what is needed at this time. And for us, it was that, again, like that, the youth workers and artists sitting together, talking it through, and then thinking about what is the process that needs to happen. So I know for a time we went into actually a restorative practice process with some young people, because there had been a bit of harm caused within a group setting. It didn't become a safeguarding issue, and I think the fear that I get asked all the time from people is what if it becomes a safeguarding issue? And it is that kind of thing of understanding that we should have spaces for young people and young men to talk about violence, of porn, of community violence, of drug dealing, and they're not safeguarding issues. You know, they are places that young people never get to talk about those things. And how do we create really safe places for that? But then understand that if it does change from something that goes from welfare to protection issue, then of course you follow your organisational process in that. And that's the thing about the organisational buy-in, to ensure that there is the organisation holding this space, you know, and that there is that support all the time. We have also, part of this is a mentoring process, so like that, and you know, with Kate and the new group that are starting here, we've actually already had some of these conversations, because that again was the question that came up around this. And it is about that kind of thing of, we're so afraid of safeguarding now that it stops us from doing the work, and that's not good either. You know,
I'll just add one thing to that as well in relation to the methodology, that we've tried as much as possible to have all these layers of protection within the methodology. So the character is anonymous, it's a character. It's not claiming to be the group. The group can imagine all kinds of things, and a lot of them have some kind of fantastical elements, which helps make it this kind of anonymous entity. And then also at that movement between that private space to the public moment, there's real care, as you said earlier, with that kind of slow transition. So sometimes the story that gets made publicly as an artwork is only a very small bit of what was said in the room. And that kind of care around, okay, we've said all of that, but now what do we want to say publicly? There's a real filtering, always thinking about that. And one of the core features of the work has been media training, for example, with young people or anybody who's at the public stage of sharing their work. Like Michael said, there was a number of young people who were part of the Stevie Project who didn't want their name attached to it, or who left during the process. So all of that care around how to go public is another kind of layer of that safeguarding as well. Maybe just one other thing that just I'm thinking of that's reminding me of some of the conversations we're having is, whatever about the decimation of youth and community projects, what we're really interested in is this project is for boys and young men anywhere broadly. So it's not only for young people from a socio-economic disadvantaged or marginalised areas. And so one of the challenges who's working with different groups of boys and young men where, and how, where are the supports and structures. So there's not youth projects everywhere, so that's just another feature of the complexity of trying to figure out how you expand and how you think about who has access.
Any other questions? Just there, just right in front of you.
You were speaking about, I think at one point, about kind of not wanting to scare away young people. And I can imagine when you're talking about, when you're creating a space where people have potentially been very vulnerable, and there's a environment like that, that could be the case. And I was just wondering, in terms of the different stages that you spoke about, how do you communicate that to the young people and give them agency within that? How do you balance that with also not wanting to scare them away and to have that drop off? And I was just really interested in how you sort of navigate that process.
Yeah, well, firstly, I think it depends on the relationship of you and the young people. And then it's the invitation you share about the program and the basis of the program and what it's about. And everything is open and transparent to young people about the information you share. So again, the points in making, how it shapes young boys and men, and that gradual conversation saying it's your opinion about how you create a boy, and again, it's that open dialogue about who is he, what age is he, and then the further the conversation goes on, where is he from? What school did he go to? You're kind of gradually building them up until the conversation becomes difficult. And then there's moments where you check in, right, to see if the young people are okay, gradually keeping performing going, right. And I know we were saying about even the fall off. Some of the fall off is not because young people were scared of the process. It's just that they were in a different headspace, where different things distracted them, and they obviously felt it was more an opportunity outside rather than wants to stay with the process. So I think it's about the language is important, about how we create the language and the opportunity that gives to young people to make sure they're well informed about what they're coming into, and keeping it open-minded for them to say. And then if there's points where it becomes difficult, we will, again, whether it's in the group or externally from the group, we will check in consecutively with the young people about what's going on, how are you finding the space, is there anything that's coming up for you that you think you need extra support with. It's, I suppose the nature of scaring them is more about the kind of questions we ask. You know what I mean? So how do we facilitate the conversation that the questions are not becoming too difficult, or we're asking the wrong question at the wrong time, and I think that's where the value of the checking in at the start is, about how young people are, and staff even, how we are as staff coming into a space. Are we ready to come into a space to facilitate a conversation that could bring up a lot of stuff around education, different types of the teams that pop up? Are we ready? And again, if we're not ready, how are young people ready? And I suppose the biggest challenge then is keeping everyone safe within the social circle that's going to be part of that, and I think that's the check-in.
I think as well, another important thing around that public piece is actually, I think there's not an expectation that there's going to be a public piece created, like that is an option that is there, and it's laid out in the methodology, and you're open and transparent with the young people, but you're not putting pressure on them to produce a piece of work at the end of it. If they just create a boy and his story, and that's as far as it goes, well then that's as far as it goes. And yeah, like you were saying there, Dannielle, like with Big Boy Vincent in that most recent exhibition in NCAD, those young boys had like a huge wealth of information and a story for Vincent. There was 100 different pieces of work that you could have created with them. They had their own ideas, but again just weren't comfortable quite yet with going ahead with any of them in particular. And we kind of scaled it down to what could go into the exhibition, and came up with kind of 12 images, little postcards that could go in to the exhibition. And then thinking that was kind of, it had been stripped down from a huge project that they had initially imagined right down to these postcards. And still, when we came back to them, Gillian, who works with them, asked them, before we go ahead with this, I'm just checking images again. Are these 12 images okay? Are you still comfortable with these 12 images? And then when she done that, the boys actually said, actually no, some of them we were not 100% comfortable with. And we went through it again, and that was reduced down to 5. So it was 5 images that went into the exhibition. And if that's what they feel is those 5 are the ones that are absolutely necessary, that's what the public needs to hear, well then that's what the public needs to hear.
And I think that consciousness about the risk of this practice is really, really important. I mean, I'm sure people that work in this field of work, whether it's within the context of working with children and young people or anybody, that there's that moment of publicness in a project that actually it becomes outside of your control. And I think just to have that kind of preparation ground for what those range of responses that might come back to you, because, you know, when something becomes public and it becomes public in this climate, there's a huge amount of risk. And we've talked a little bit about like who's taking the risk and who's and the appetite for risk. And I think a lot of those conversations are really, really interesting within the context of this work. You know, we've had projects with children and young people that have gone out into the public domain, and actually the criticism or critique comes from very, very surprising pockets of supposed leadership even sometimes, and that can be really dismantling in terms of that civic engagement within spaces of leadership. If the people that are supposed to be caring for you or looking after you are challenging your belief system or your views of the world in a very detrimental way, that's not a conversation, it's no, you're wrong, then actually we fall at the first hurdle. And just one thing I wanted to share about some of the evolution of that kind of idea of spaces of risk. We have to create spaces where we can have these difficult conversations. We have to be able to rehearse these emotions and experiences in spaces like this, because actually the alternative is that we meet them in a different way. And we used to have a safe spaces policy for our community work within Heart of Glass, and then that changed into safer spaces policy, because we suddenly realised actually we can't promise safety, and now we're actually looking at practices of risk and how we make conscious risks together. Because actually we need to be able to have those different conversations in different spaces where we can be together in difference and still move forward. So it's a really interesting evolution, I think, over the last couple of years within this practice. And I feel like the thinking that's gone into this project and that duration is so essential, because this couldn't have been done in a year. This is like test, explore, refine, move away, take a breather, go back to it, look at it from a different angle. And that maintaining of the relationship seems just so critical. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how you've sustained that relationship.
Loads of grey hair. No, I mean, and that I think that is the big thing that me and Fiona spend a lot of time talking about, is that the carefulness of the relationships are obviously the heart of what we do. But then as you do begin to move out, what does that look like, and what do you need for that, and what capacities are needed for that? And, you know, we've looked at loads of things, from what does he need becoming its own entity, to trying to look at kind of state funding, to, you know, a pool of different people. So that's a really hard one, but at the core of it is it's always relational and coming back, and collaboration, and that kind of, you were talking about that risk, the risk of collaboration and relationships, and how do we do that together, you know. And
the other thing that strikes me is, until I started in Rialto 20 years ago as an artist in residence, the model that I was used to was the idea of the artist being invited in when a project idea was somebody, a cultural organisation or a community organisation, somebody had a kind of an idea, and then the artist came in, and the usual invitation was the group meet on a Tuesday, come in on the Tuesday, and we might have one meeting during the week, or that kind of a model. Whereas what I really welcomed 20 years ago was to be an artist in residence in a youth project. Completely different expectation, to just be present to young people, be present to youth workers, be present to the place that the organisation existed in, to think together, to have lunch together, to observe each other's practices, and just actually try to figure out, actually, what could we do together? And I think those types of invitations need to be afforded to people more, to figure out what the thing could be, you know, and then let the ideas evolve from there, from wherever they come from. And I think that's probably been the approach that has sustained us. And then when a project is over, like, I mean, if we look back on 20 years of collaboration, there's been maybe 4 or 5 big 3, 4, 5 year projects. But when one is over, it's not like bye-bye the artist straight away. It's like hang around again for the kind of post-project discussions, because there's an awful lot happens in that informal space that the artist isn't always, or the cultural organisation has moved out again, and trying to just stay present to each other with no great agenda other than to listen and think together, has been probably the core. That, as you say, the relationships, just trying to hold them and figure out, you know, but also in terms of something being sustainable. I mean, one of the key things we built into this project was also trying to replace ourselves. You know, that was trying to actually see, you know, from the get-go, how could we begin to articulate this methodology so we, you know, others, and like all those boys that have been named, there's 19 now have been created, all different artists and youth workers and contexts, and so all the time trying to learn how it doesn't, you know, how you kind of, share what you've got, but then write yourself out of it as well.
I think we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. There's a question just at the front. Maybe take one more, and then I'm sure everyone's probably starving as well.
Of course. Just want to say thank you so much for sharing, and it sounds like an incredible project, and it's just been really wonderful to be able to just sit and listen to your reflections. My question is about just your experience of evaluation of the process. So, maybe just what you learnt through the evaluation, but also from what I've had from experience, there's a lot of challenges in how the infrastructure we have around evaluation and being able to show the impact of like community-led and participation projects.
Yeah, there might be, this isn't a 2-minute question, so I'll try to do it quickly. 1 minute, okay. Evaluation in 1 minute. One of the things we're resisting is the idea of impact, the word impact, and the idea that we should be able to assess the value of something quite quickly after it has happened. None of us really can understand or measure what this process is doing, I think is probably the truth of it. But certainly we have, by working with Kieran Smith, we did an evaluation with every group and began to think, you know, with the staff, what is coming up, looked at what was the anticipations, what was the experience, and what's the reflections, and have kind of this cycle of experience that we keep returning to try to understand and unpack the value. But but the kind of politics of evaluation, the kind of technocratic, name it, frame it, and say what happened, we're really resisting because it's so unfolding. It's years in the making, but it's still, we don't quite understand yet the full value of it. I think anecdotally, lots of youth workers can speak about specifics of young men and how things have changed. We could also speak about some of the systems that have listened to us through some of the work. You know, some of the work has been presented in different contexts where people in power have listened to it and, you know, thought about the impact of some policies. And so there's things we could do, but sort of, it's a complex one for us trying to figure that out. So
we'll end it on complex then. So, but thank you, everyone. And everyone's around all day anyway. So if you want to grab any further information, let myself or Kate know, or one of the gang. But thanks for being with us.